couple of minutes, just letting people slowly but surely get into the meeting. Salut Patrick. Et n'hésitez pas à poser des questions en français. Ça me fera plaisir de répondre. Ou en anglais, pas choix. Okay, we'll give it another minute before we start. Mike, is that okay?
Perfect.
Yeah. Oh, some of my colleagues joining. Hello, Kevin. Anne-Marie. Bonjour. So you guys, everyone that's on the meeting, your microphones and your cameras are off for now during the first part, which is the presentation, but your microphones and cameras will be turned on as soon as the presentation's over for a discussion and Q&A period. So in the meantime, you can ask your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A icon. Okay, well, 30 more seconds before we get going. Is it hot everywhere across Canada? I know on the east side it's very hot. Anybody on the west coast? How is it over there? Not as bad? You can answer in the chat box for now. Oh, scorching in Cape Breton. Okay. Yep. Okay, so I guess it's 2:02, so we can get going, and those that keep coming in will just join as we go along. So hi everybody, thanks for joining today. By the way, just want to let you know that this session is being recorded. And so for those that don't know me, my name is Pascal. I'm a partner at the BDC's Climate Tech Fund, and I'll show my colors right up front. I think IP is really important, and IAC is a federal initiative to help companies like yours become more competitive and more IP literate. And Mike, who's on the screen, he's the CEO of IAC, and he'll tell you all about it in a minute. But in terms of my IP background, I've been on all three sides of the IP table. And yes, this is a triangular table. So I spent 5 years in an IP firm drafting patent applications and infringement opinions. I spent over 10 years in pre-investment IP due diligence from the investor side of the table. And I headed up the IP function inside a clean tech company that had over 600 patent and trademark applications. So they were spending a couple million a year on IP. But stepping back, and just to provide context on why IAC was created back in 2019, I'm sure Mike will talk about that or may talk about that a bit, but really it's because Canada was lagging in IP commercialization and Canadian IP was being lost to other countries. And yes, Canada's really good at R&D. You've probably heard that. We're good at fundamental applied research, and Canadian universities publish above their weight, but there are challenges that need to be addressed, and that's what IAC is for. So, and let's be honest, as an investor, I like and actually value a company that has a solid IP strategy and IP portfolio. And that's not necessarily just patent, it's a mix of patents, designs, trademarks, and copyrights. And it's reassuring to an investor when a company has a totally legal monopoly for 20 years. That's a really great moat, and a patent provides that. So yes, I will encourage you to become a member of IAC. It's a no-brainer. If you have an IP portfolio and plan on filing at least one patent application, or you have a PCT entering national phases, or you're doing freedom to operate work, IAC membership will be completely refunded. In other words, Mike will maybe get into more detail and you can ask questions at the end, but there's a 15,000 membership fee for the IAC, and they will refund you the first 15,000 of your IP expenses. So essentially, you get to file a patent or spend $15 on IP and it gets totally refunded. So it's, for me, it's really a no-brainer. And just so you know, I don't have shares in IAC and I do not make a commission on your signing up to new IAC membership. I just feel that it's really important and you should take advantage of it. So anyway, I have the pleasure of introducing Mike. He's going to present IAC in more detail. This should last about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A period where you can ask almost any questions. We'll open up the cameras and the mics, like I said. In the meantime, you can ask your questions in the chat. And the only question you can ask is for the IAC folks to help you draft the next claim for your next great invention. So that's going to be too complicated for now. So Mike is the CEO of Innovation Asset Collective, and he'll be telling you about how IAC helps Canadian tech companies maximize the value of their intangible assets like IP. Mike's been a leading voice in IP in Canada and plays a key role in empowering and expanding the Canadian IP ecosystem. He's passionate, you'll see it, about promoting the need for robust IP strategies. And anyway, Mike, I will hand over the mic to you. And also want to thank Dana, Belen, Karan, and Ron, who are on the call and will help out, and folks that have helped organize this webinar. So Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Pascal. I really appreciate that kind introduction and all the help organizing this meeting and getting the group of entrepreneurs and business leaders together to talk about intellectual property and the role it can play in growing their businesses. Let me just share a slide deck. Take me 1 minute and we'll get things underway. All right, so today's talk is going to focus on driving value with IP strategy. And we'll walk through some of the situations we see currently in Canada, some of the change we think needs to happen, and what are the steps in that companies can take to help with that change, and how the role IAC is playing in that process, and how we can help organizations like you be more successful. So Pascal gave a very kind introduction to myself. Provide a little bit more background because I think it provides context for this conversation. I spent the first roughly 25 years of my career working in technology and intellectual property, most of that with a company in Ottawa called Tech Insights. And Tech Insights is a key component of Tech Insights business at the time was basically being the CSI of the patent world. So we reverse engineered semiconductor products, wireless products, software, looking for evidence of patent infringement and helping support large technology companies around the world as they asserted their patent rights either in litigation or to drive additional revenues into their businesses. So I got to learn firsthand how large multinationals use IP, how they think about intellectual property, how they protect key markets using those assets, how they generate significant inflows of revenue and capital into their businesses to further their R&D. So a very educational process through that time in my career. At the same time, though, I was part of building a Canadian SME. When I joined Tech Insights in the mid-90s, we were less than 50 people, under $10 million in revenue, and grew that over my time there significantly. In fact, shortly after I left, they had an exit in the 9-figure range. So a great success in Canadian business, but one where I saw really the role of intellectual property could play in that growth. We were quite active in developing both trade secrets and patents around our lab technologies that allowed us to do that reverse engineering work. Had a brand around Tech Insights and some of our product lines that we had to defend quite carefully and protect that brand reputation using trademarks. And what really ended up driving significant value into the enterprise was our use of data. Over time, we had gathered an inventory of those testing results and the ability to segment that, package it, create different business models around it, wrap different pricing around it, created a strong growth in business and one that was really attractive to the investment community. So we had a significant uptick in enterprise value from the use of data in that business. So learned a lot from that side as well. I'm part of the larger team, though, here at IAC. We've put together a really core group of IP experts across a range of different specialties, whether those be IP strategy, whether those be developing new IP rights and IP positions, whether those be transactions and licensing and the commercialization of intellectual property, whether those be looking at analytics around different IP positions. Really a broad set of expertise that is fairly unique in the Canadian ecosystem with an organization working to help Canadian SMEs. So really proud of the team we have here and hope you get the opportunity to interact with many of these individuals. Let's talk about the situation we face here in Canada. The statistics around Canadian intellectual property are very, very negative to say the least. Over the past 20 years, the rate of Canadian invented patents owned by foreign firms have tripled. And this means that Canadian invented patents over 20 years ago were foreign owned by a total about 18%. Now that ownership total is 56%. So more than half of Canadian invented patents today are owned by foreign firms. And that ownership piece is really key to where the share of profits that drive from the intellectual property flow and really impacts the future prosperity of Canadian enterprises and the country as a whole. And that's reflected as well in the role of IP assets in Canada's economy has diminished since 2000. LexisNexis publishes a top 100 IP or innovators around the world every few years. And they base that using patent data as a proxy for innovation. And they study both the size of the IP portfolios as well as the quality of the patents contained in those portfolios. 3 years ago, there wasn't a single Canadian company in that top 100. This year, there was one. But if you look at the over 10,000 companies they've studied worldwide and take out the Canadian enterprises in that data set, Canada had a slight positive growth in terms of the role of IP assets from 2000 to 2014, but it's been on a negative trajectory since then. Unfortunately, that slight positive slope was solely due to two companies. It was due to BlackBerry and it was due to WiLAN. BlackBerry is obviously what has happened since 2014 with that company, and WiLAN is a patent enforcement company based here in Ottawa that buys assets from other organizations and looks to monetize those. So not reflective of a cohesive and growing tech ecosystem that knows how to commercialize IP assets. We've got some change that needs to happen in this country in terms of that practice. Why does this matter? Why should we care? As citizens, as entrepreneurs, as innovators in this country, why should we care about the relative competitiveness of our intellectual property? It really comes down to the comparison between Canadian enterprises and international companies and what they're doing to develop IP ownership positions to create leverage for their companies in specific markets. Without that ownership position, market access for Canadian companies will be limited. That can come from litigation, which tends to be the high-profile, news-generating piece, but more often than not can come from pressure on customers, from licensing fees that get charged, royalty rates. All of that really limits the access to a market and the ability of Canadian companies to compete successfully in a given space. That limited market access transfers to a lower share of profits, either because you're having to pay for access through a royalty piece, or you're unable to achieve premium pricing or really competitive pricing in a given market due to the lack of IP ownership. That lack of consistent profit share is what drives down company value, whether that be the ability to reinvest profits for growth in the company, whether that be the investment community looking to place a multiple on your existing profits, or your ability to generate profits in the future, all of which really diminish enterprise value in the global economy. There is a solution to this problem, though, and it starts with companies taking action. Individual companies must champion their intellectual property and look to understand how to use intellectual property to compete more successfully. We'll talk about some of the ways that companies can start to do that, as well as some of the support available from IEC and other players in the ecosystem to help with that process. So IP really is about creating sustained differentiation, looking at the aspects of your technology that are going to make a difference in the sale of your product, creating ownership positions around those features. That technology is what attracts investors. As Pascal mentioned, he really likes seeing 20-year moats built around key product areas. So the ability to do that in consistent ways attracts investors. The capital that comes from those investors allows the new technologies to build, to increase the additional features, additional offerings from the company, and that's what really drives growth that can be sustained over time. And that's really what we're looking at here is how do we help drive the growth of Canadian businesses through the use of intellectual property. Unfortunately, when we talk to many companies, their view on IP strategy is quite limited, and that's a key piece we're looking to change with our efforts at IEC. Oftentimes, we'll talk to early stage companies, and they'll say they've filed a provisional patent around their core innovation, and that's really as far as their thinking goes around IP strategy. Or they'll say they're going to treat all of their intellectual property as a trade secret, and they NDA everyone they speak to, therefore they're comfortable with their approach to intellectual property. When we start talking to people who have taken a bit of a further step, they'll have some thought to the markets and geographies that are going to be important to them from a selling standpoint, and have some thought as to where they would like to file their intellectual property and register the intellectual property. But again, that's still not a cohesive IP strategy that's going to help move the company forward. And when we advise companies on building sound IP strategy, we really talk to them about the inputs they need to consider. And it all should flow from their overall business strategy. And that is really a fulsome understanding of their competitive environment. Right? Who else is playing in their space? What types of products are they competing with? What are the features within that marketplace that are driving revenue, that are helping companies make buying decisions? What are companies buying on? And that understanding of that environment, of who's playing there, who's winning and why, really needs to input into the IP strategy. The second piece is really the company's strengths around the technology and products they're building. What is that roadmap over the next 5 or 10 years of where that technology is going to evolve and grow? And what are going to be the key aspects of that allow the company to win in the marketplace? Obviously, that's not going to be a fixed path that's really set in stone over a 10-year period. There's going to be pivots, changes, it's going to evolve. But having some sense of direction is really important when building out an IP strategy. And then the final input piece is the IP landscape. Who owns IP positions that are relevant to that technology, that are relevant to key revenue streams in that market, and who maybe can limit access to those markets or cause changes in product design as a result of ownership positions, and what can be done with that. So those are the inputs to really sound IP strategy. Then there's really two plans that need to be developed out of those inputs. The first is a plan around the IP ownership position. What is the intellectual property that's going to be required to be owned by the company to be successful 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, as you grow and scale the business? How will that balance those other positions out in the IP landscape? And really important to think that through carefully. And that needs to consider a range of IP rights, not just patents or trademarks, depending on the business, but how do you create kind of a latticed approach of different IP rights that really can build the strongest position? The second plan needs to be one that identifies IP risk and puts in place appropriate mitigation activities to address that risk as the business grows and matures. So that could be quite simple at the early stage, but as the business starts to get traction and generate revenue, those risk mitigation activities are going to need to get more complex and more sophisticated. With those two plans in place, the company now can start to make decisions and put in place practices that build a culture and build a practice of intellectual property within the business. And it's that culture of intellectual property that grows the type of strength that builds sustainable value. And that's kind of the flow and evolution we want to see in companies we're advising as they progress down this path. And you can see here just a graphic trying to reinforce the importance of IP strategy in considering kind of the three different aspects that need to come together of the technology, the intellectual property itself, and the business value. And where those intersect, that's where the thoughtfulness and the growth prospects come from a well-built strategy. And the output of this, there's a concrete plan for directing decisions and actions about intangible assets. And that plan will really drive value and minimize risk for the organization over time as it grows. And what you'll see if that's successfully executed is that there should be a greater range of opportunities that come forward for the organization because they've secured the options around those opportunities by protecting the appropriate intellectual property. And that the longer term differentiation of the company's business is really owned and substantiated through the building of this effort. And you can see here some of the pieces that need to layer into that. So again, all starts with your business strategy or corporate strategy, and then steps into an IP strategy. And that strategy will set an operating framework around intellectual property. That includes awareness for all your staff. It includes building out systems, policies, processes, tools that allow the different activities to be executed properly, and the establishment of an IP team. And that may include internal staff. Oftentimes with early stage companies, that's an individual that is the lead, but likely is performing other responsibilities within the organization, but over time may build into a full-time individual or a full-time team supporting that effort. But also what external expertise, external knowledge is required to execute on these pieces at the highest level, and where can you access that support, either from sound law firms, other consultants, or organizations like IEC that are set up as a not-for-profit to really help and guide these efforts. So let's talk a little bit about IP risk and where it comes from. With early stage companies, and really with all companies, there's two sources of IP risk. The first and most prominent is internal sources, the loss of confidential information, either from that can come in many forms, from a member of your R&D team really excited about their work and posting excessive detail on their LinkedIn or other social media platforms. It could come from just talk with local colleagues that exceeds bounds of really what should be shared, or it could come from a key staff member leaving and joining a competitor, and how is that dealt with? It can also come from in businesses with a physical location, having visitors into the location, what's posted on the whiteboards, what electronic material is provided. How do you manage phones and laptops coming into the business? A lot of different pieces there that can impact that internal loss of information. So important to have that thought through, and there's some really sound guidance on best practices to secure that, minimize that risk. The second piece of risk is external. And this is the risk of being locked out of a market or value chain by a third-party holder of intellectual property, or having a really high price placed on access to that market by that holder of IP. And let's talk about really some mechanisms, or sort of how that, what that looks like, and how to deal with that. So this really takes us to the concept of freedom to operate, or FTO. That's the ability of a business to conduct and grow its operation in the desired markets by having a strategy to navigate the risks associated with the IP owned by others. So this comes down to really understanding your value chain. Where do you fit within that value chain? Are you a supplier into other people? Are you an end component provider? Are you integrating components from different people? Where you fit in that value chain is really important. How crowded is this space? So there are only 4 or 5 companies in the world operating this space. Is there 50 or 100 different players? What is the IP ownership positions of those various players, and how is that going to impact your access to the market? And then really, in absence of a strategy to address those two pieces, really can cause problems. We took this graphic from an article in IAM Media that really shows how oftentimes companies think about intellectual property. And typically they look at their direct competitors that they immediately surround them. But oftentimes the risk comes from farther outside the direct ecosystem. That could be from a non-practicing entity with IP in that area, or it could come from different parts of the value chain than you expect. We had a member company last summer that put in an RFQ for a key component to their end product. And they selected a vendor to supply that component. But one of the companies that was unsuccessful in that process quickly notified them that they had a handful of patents that were really relevant to their end product, and they may want to reconsider that decision. So it's not always just direct competitors that are an issue. different pieces of the value chain may use intellectual property in different ways that still pose a risk to your business. So in addressing that, there's a number of different pieces that can be built into a process to mitigate those risks. There can be sort of tracking those intellectual property positions ahead of time and making design decisions and architectural decisions that help you avoid infringing on some of those key pieces. But at the end of the day, there is likely to be intellectual property that is relevant to your product. So do you have the ability to counter assert? So do you have your own intellectual property or the ability to access other intellectual property to balance the IP that is inbound against you? And how are you going to pay and fund dealing with these types of disputes? And there are people that can self-fund that because they are well capitalized. But many organizations are looking at IP insurance as a tool to help deal with these type of situations and as a risk mitigation, a key piece of their risk mitigation strategy when it comes to intellectual property issues. We'll talk about that detail or details around that a little bit further in this presentation. So that takes us to the role of IEC in helping companies deal with these issues. IEC was founded as part of the federal IP strategy that was established in 2018, looking to enhance the ability for small and medium-sized enterprises in Canada to utilize IP in global markets. And IEC was chosen at that time to administer the $30 million investment from the federal government to form and execute on the Patent Collective pilot project. And we've been refunded earlier this year through the most recent federal budget to continue our efforts and to build on the organization and create a more sustainable operation outside of that pilot project. So we operate as a membership-based not-for-profit. So that means we are not here to maximize our return from a given company. We're looking at what is the benefit we can provide to clean tech companies in Canada, and how can we help be really an honest broker in this process and help them understand how to move forward most effectively. So the IEC Impact talked a lot about IP strategy already this afternoon, and that's really the key piece that we want to help companies with, is really moving to a position where they can form and execute on sound IP strategy that is appropriate for their business. And we do that through 5 different programs. 3 of those programs are really aimed at driving value creation into the business. So the first is IP education. We work to help educate entrepreneurs, innovators on IP strategy, on the pieces of intellectual property they need to implement in their business. We're not trying to create another suite of patent agents, patent lawyers, trademark agents. This is about what do business leaders need to know so they can be successful in growing their businesses and using intellectual property. The second program we have is IP funding. We know that intellectual property is expensive. It takes important capital from the business to build out and start this process. And we understand that companies, especially early stage companies, want to use the majority of their capital on building new technology, building product, and selling those products into the marketplace. So we provide really purpose-specific funding to help companies pay for IP activity on a more consistent basis. The third program is IP Intelligence. Mentioned that we think it's really important to have an input and an understanding of the competitive environment in a given space and the IP landscape in that space. And we do research to help inform our member companies on those details. So we segment out clean tech into a number of different verticals and fund research into the competitive activity in those spaces and the IP holdings of the companies that are operating in those spaces, so our members can have that information as they build out their strategies. The final suite of programming is really around risk mitigation. So how do we help companies increase their freedom to operate in a given space? Those IP Intelligence reports can help them navigate and identify risks proactively so they can avoid those at the front end. But for companies that do face inbound assertion, we have 2 key tools to help deal with that. We are out building our own patent portfolio, so we buy patents on the open market, and we can make those available to our member companies if they face assertion from an outside company so that they have something to counter that assertion. We also offer an insurance program to our members. So we fund a baseline of $1 million of IP insurance coverage, and that can be supplemented at company's own cost if they want to add to that. But it provides the ability to fund a defensive action. Also, if they need to assert their own IP rights, a portion of that $1 million can be directed to that activity as well. So a range of programming there, all aimed at helping to move Canadian clean tech SMEs forward and give them the tools they need to be successful. I've already spoken to these in a fair amount of detail, so I'll skip these few slides just now. We've also implemented an IP maturity framework, and this is a tool that allows us to evaluate the current state of intellectual property within the business when they join IAC, so that we can understand the level of practice within the business and really direct the appropriate resources from IAC to that specific member company. So our solution is not a one size fits all. We evaluate where you are as a business and direct specific solutions to you that we think will be helpful in progressing your company. This tool also allows us to measure progress. So we want companies achieving outcomes based on this activity. We just don't want to be tracking webinars like this we run or other activity we're doing. We really want to see companies progressing. And this is a tool that allows us to measure that more accurately. So as companies work with us over time, we can track their progress and see the outcomes that are resulting from this investment of time and money. So that's really important to really validate the overall investment in intellectual property the federal government and others are making to help move Canadian companies forward. The maturity framework evaluates companies on really 4 different areas. The first is IP strategy. The second is approach to risk. And those are 2 areas I've spoken to in a fair amount of detail already. The third is our approach to data. It's not relevant to all companies, but in many in today's environment, data is going to be a key business driver. So we need to understand the governance and approach they're taking and business models they're wrapping around that. So there's an evaluation piece there. And then the final item is IP culture. Is there really a consistent approach and practice to IP across the business? Is there an awareness and understanding, and really does that make a difference in the business as they go forward? So the tool evaluates the business maturity across those 4 categories. That allows us to place the company into a maturity level, simply numbered 1 through 4. Do they have simple awareness and the ability to identify intellectual property? Do they know how to implement intellectual property within the business? Are they starting to align their IP strategy with their business strategy, or are they fully integrated in the practice of intellectual property? And we direct specific education resources, specific programming resources, depending on where a company is bucketed across this framework. Also want to touch on the power of the patent portfolio. As I said, we are out acquiring patents on the open market. We've identified through our research that there are over 125 large multinationals that are active in the clean tech space and have a history of litigating patents against SMEs in their markets. So that when they sense market disruption, they act quickly and aggressively with their patent portfolios. So we have identified who those companies are. We've identified where their revenue comes from, and we are out purchasing patents to create leverage against those revenue streams so that if one of our companies faces a situation where they need to negotiate with such an entity, they're going to have an asset or a set of assets that can provide leverage and lead to a more successful negotiation and create more favorable terms for a final agreement between the two entities so that they can move forward and have successful business. That's a really key piece of what we're doing. Ron, who's on the call today, is a core part of our team there and plays a big role in sort of identifying the technologies of interest and helping to move those pieces forward. We also take input from our member companies. We've had a number of companies approach us and either identify intellectual property that's on the market that's of interest to them, or identify risks that they'd like us to address and have us do some research to identify specific IP that can help with that. So really open to an ongoing dialogue with our member companies in that regard. So this portfolio is really valuable and going to be a tool for our member companies on an ongoing basis. Finally, before I get into sort of the actual structure of the membership, really our core goal at IDC is to create IP-savvy business leaders in Canada. So this is about progressing the knowledge of our entrepreneurs and our innovators so that we can move from a position of low performance to really being a leader when it comes to intellectual property and its use to drive business outcomes and to get our tech businesses to scale in the global economy. An outline of our membership. So our full membership does come with a $15,000 annual fee, as Pascal mentioned, to kick things off. That fee provides access to all 5 of our programs. It comes with a $15,000 credit, as Pascal mentioned as well. So if you have an annual expense of at least $15,000, basically you're getting access to the rest of our programming free of charge. So really designed to be a no-brainer and to provide benefit to Canadian clean tech companies looking to move forward with their intellectual property programming. Our membership spans the country, over 250 companies representing, I think, 9 of the 10 provinces, still looking for our first member in PEI, and 1 of the 3 territories. So great coverage across the country. And you can see the different technologies covered there. But that's something that's really grown over the last few years, and we're looking to continue that growth as we move forward, and hoping that many of the companies on this call will consider the benefits of our program and look to come on as a member. Just a case study, hopefully will provide some context. We have a member that has a wireless power technology and looking to really build a suite of products around that. They've got a first product and then a roadmap of additional products that are going to be built out over time. The management team there is relatively new to intellectual property. So the education we're providing both for them and their staff has been really core to them understanding these issues and being able to make more effective decisions. They've taken strong advantage of our funding programs, both the credit I mentioned earlier, as well as several grants to accelerate the pace of their building of their IP position. And it's taken them away from some either or decisions that they faced of either do we hire this new engineer or do we file this sort of suite of patents in several jurisdictions. It's taken them out of that either or decision, allowed them to proceed with both. It's allowed them to really understand the wireless space is very active when it comes to intellectual property. So they've been able to better understand this complex landscape and be more informed when it comes to overall strategy. And they've built out a risk mitigation approach that's allowed them to avoid delays in commercializing their technologies. So a big win for that organization in terms of our interaction with them. I think spoke to some of the points here already. And I'll just wrap up with some testimonials from some of our existing members. So there's a statement from Carbon Upcycling, another one from eZync, Solus Power, and Paul East Ivert. Some information, how to get in touch with us if you're interested in joining. Please reach out. Happy to have a conversation, learn more about your business, and talk about how IC can be of assistance. Takes us into questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike, for that great presentation and overview of what IP is, why it's important, and how IAC can help. Yeah, let's take some questions, and if there aren't any, I have about 20. So I encourage you folks on the call to ask your questions instead. And Dana, can you let the people in so we can go on camera with the people so they don't have to put it in the chat box? Is that possible?
I am unmuting everyone now, so everyone should have access to their camera and their microphone in just a second.
Okay. In the meantime, while Dana does that, Mike, can you tell us more about the concept of patent pool and patent collective? So you didn't mention those specific words, but I think that's originally how what IAC was originally set up to do. So what is a patent pool and how does it work?
Patent pool can take many forms, and oftentimes it's an arrangement to enable the licensing of patents around a standard or around a piece of technology, where there's a number of companies building that technology, and allows for a more efficient licensing process. So there's a number of patent pools set up to do that. MPEG, for example, is a technology with a patent pool. There's a number of others in the commercial electronics space. There are also what are known as sovereign patent funds. So Japan, Korea, France had one, Taiwan. So these are government-funded initiatives to purchase intellectual property from those countries and look at different mechanisms to monetize that intellectual property and use that mechanism to flow capital back into companies in those jurisdictions and to drive new revenue streams for some of those companies. Our approach is a third avenue, which is the defensive angle. So looking at how do we address IP assertion against Canadian companies that may be not yet prepared to deal with that assertion? And can we create a pool of patents or a collective of patents that provides that defensive mechanism and buy those on proactively on behalf of our member companies so that if they do face a situation where they need defensive assets, we're going to be a source of those assets that they can draw upon. So if one of our members faces a patent assertion, they can come to us and say, Company X just asserted against us. Our patent portfolio is too small to provide any counterbalance to that. Do you have any patents that can help? And we'll look at that company, identify where they've made their money. We may have already done that. Identify which patents in our portfolio are relevant, if any, and then arrange a transfer of those assets to the member company so they have some ammunition to deal with in that negotiation.
So in other words, you're scaring the multinational away from actually going forward with a prosecution or with a suit because they fear that your portfolio is bigger and it will be more complex and more costly to actually sue you.
When we're fully built out with that portfolio, it should be like a nuclear deterrent, right? It's really visible, and people should avoid assertion as a result of it being there. Until it gets to that point, it's going to be there and will be longer term to provide individual sort of assets to be ammunition in dispute.
Okay, great. I think we have a bunch of questions. So Carol, you were the first to raise your hand, so please go ahead.
Yes, it might have been answered actually in the chat, but it was about the insurance. I find that really interesting. What is the cost? What's the cost to the companies?
So if you are a active full member of IEC, so you've paid your $15,000, IEC covers the first $1 million in coverage. So we'll fund that. You pay for it, we reimburse that cost to you. Those costs are lower, though, than if you tried to get that insurance on your own. So the providers are saying they're providing at least a 35% discount because they can diversify the risk across the collective rather than have it solely be borne by the individual company. If you want more than $1 million of coverage, you can supplement that at your own cost, but again, still at that discounted rate. So it's going to be more cost effective for you to do so.
Is that good, Carol? Yes. Okay, Mehrdad, you have a question?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Pascal. Great presentation. Just a quick question. Do you also have access to any expert or patent agent in Europe? Let's say in the case of FTOs in Europe or any opposition in Europe, usually they need to be a lawyer or in Europe or a patent agent in Europe to make sure that they follow the European law. So do you have access to those type of expertise?
Yes, we have relationships, international relationships. So we're not going to do that work for you, but we can help teach you on sort of what are the questions to ask, who to reach out to, provide some guidance to help you select the right professional lawyer or service provider, what have you, to deal with those situations. So yeah, very, very happy to help sort of guide you through that process and understand where to look for those people and how to evaluate them to select the appropriate provider.
Perfect, thanks.
I guess that would be part of an IP strategy because a lot of the companies in our portfolio, and I guess in any portfolio, will get some nice or nasty letters from competitors reminding them of their patents and whether or not they may infringe those patents. So like in the US, there's inter partes review, and in Europe, there's opposition. So is there anything particular in an IP strategy that would address those issues? Like, because this is happening regularly to our companies, how should they handle that?
Yeah, the risk mitigation piece needs to be thought through with the IP strategy. So ideally, you're identifying as many of those risks proactively as possible, and that you then have a suite of different tools depending on the nature of the risk that realizes itself, and ways of making those decisions. Again, whether that's inter partes review, whether that's litigation, whether that's negotiation through counter assertion, whether you are gathering prior art proactively around certain positions. There's a number of different tools available, but it really comes down to having a plan, knowing what you can know about things proactively, and then understanding what tools are going to be available to you so that when you get into that situation, you can act quickly.
Okay, great. Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. Thanks, Mike and team. Really interesting. And I think it's about time that our company Alter Biota joined. So thanks for all this additional information. We have one product that we're working on that's a little more on the digital side for us. We're a materials company, but we have one product that's a little more on the tech side. And an advisor had mentioned that it might be a good idea to join the LOT network. Now, how does that fit into an overall strategy that includes IAC? Like, is there? Your smile indicates that you know about the LOT network.
I do, yeah, quite well.
Yeah. Well, okay, good. And so, yeah, how could that fit into an overall strategy together with IAC, et cetera? And do you have any thoughts on?
So
and can you explain what that is so that others don't know what it is?
I'll explain what it is. So there are a number of initiatives established to try and counter the threat from non-practicing entities, patent trolls, to use a common term. These are organizations that buy or access intellectual property from technology companies. They have no product of their own. They identify revenue streams and businesses practicing that technology, and they assert that technology or assert those patent rights in return to sign licenses or litigation settlements. So their only source of revenue is through the assertion of IP. Because they have no product, there is no counter assertion available. Right. So the typical response, and the one I've spent some time talking about of counter assertion today, that's not a tool available with these types of entities. The LOT network is one of the initiatives set up to try and deal with this proliferation of activity by disarming them somewhat. So what it does is companies sign on to the LOT network, and what it says is they will license every other member of the LOT network to their patents in the situation where they were ever to sell those patents to an MPE or to sell them to a third party. So it basically takes away patent rights that may become available to an MPE, protects the network that belongs to the LOT process from those suite of patents. To me, I don't know enough about the sort of the size and scale of your business, Mark. I think it's putting strings on your own IP unnecessarily. And I'm guessing most early stage businesses, MPEs aren't going to be the primary threat. It's going to be direct competitors or someone in their ecosystem, a supplier, someone else in that value chain is going to be more of a threat. So I would hold off on joining LOT. There may be a stage where, LOT is necessary. If you look at the MPE world, they assert most of their patents in the semiconductor space, in the wireless telecom space, and the e-commerce space. There are some other litigations. But if you're not necessarily in those spaces, the threat may be less. So I would think carefully before joining LOT. There are definitely some benefits for certain types of businesses, but I think some people get out ahead of themselves and join too early and add some strings to their portfolio that weren't necessary.
If I could just add something on LOT.
Yeah, please do. Ron.
If the patents that are owned by an operating company that belongs to LOT are sold to another operating company, you don't have protection against them. It's really just meant to inoculate their members from patent assertion entities or, trolls buying those patents coming after them.
I see. Okay. Good.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? Now's the time. If you're debating, should we join? Should we not join? Now's the time to ask questions. Otherwise, I'm going to keep asking questions for the next 3 minutes. Can you walk us through the mechanics of getting refunded for some of, like, how does that work? Because now we're hearing that there's significant delays in certain federal organizations and signing checks. I'm not going to name any names, but like, how does it work? Is it quick?
Very, very, very quick. So once you've paid your membership fees to IC, you can submit any invoices and proof of payment for IP expenses you've had. Those are vetted quickly by our team and sent to my desk for authorization. And money typically flows within a few weeks. So that's a very efficient process from our side. In addition to the credit piece, we also run competitive grant rounds at various stages during the year. And that's where we evaluate the company's IP strategy. We look at the activity they're looking to fund and assess its consistency with that IP strategy. And we rank those, and we can provide $5,000 to $20,000 additional dollars for a specific application at a few different stages during the year. So there's additional funding available on top of the credit piece as well.
Great. And maybe another question. I don't think there's any patent agents or patent lawyers on the call. So how much should the companies, our portfolio companies, listen to their patent agent or patent lawyer on whether they should file a patent, whether they should do this, whether they should do that? Like, of course, they're going to provide the best advice possible, but is there situations where you should put on the brakes? Like I think,
yeah. So I think most practitioners give really sound advice in that regard. They're going to be judicious and work to understand your business and what your needs are, and provide sound advice on what to file, when to file it, and where to file it. You will see some practitioners that can be motivated by revenue opportunities, right? And they're going to get paid.
If they tell you to file in 53 countries, for example, your PCT.
Exactly. So there's some signs of excess, either of moving too fast, filing too many things, filing in too many countries. That's where I would start to ask questions, and you may need to consider an alternative provider unless there's really good justification of why so many countries are needed, or such a sort of increase in filing rate possibly is being proposed.
Okay, great. I think we're coming up to the hour, so I would like to thank everybody for joining, Mike for the great presentation, Dana and Belen and Karan for the organization, and everybody for joining. So if you have any more questions, you can contact me, but ideally you can contact IAC if there's any burning questions before you sign up or want to sign up. But yeah, thanks everybody, and see you around.
Yes, thanks everyone. Really appreciate the time, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk directly soon.
Thanks. Bye.